Welcome, everyone, to EMET's weekly webinar this week featuring Dr. Asaf Romirowsky, Executive Director of Scholars for Peace in the Middle East and of the Association for the Study of the Middle East and Africa, discussing the growing and seemingly unchecked anti-Semitism that we see pervading our nation's college campuses and even public and private K-12 schools. Today's webinar is being co-sponsored by Scholars for Peace in the Middle East, of which I serve as Vice President and Treasurer, working with Asaf on important issues relevant to bringing truth, or emet, to the studies of the Middle East and support for those faculty members fighting the battles they confront on their campuses. SPME has been at the forefront of fighting the BDS movement, which has, since October 7th, become a powerful tool of the leftist and Islamist Jew haters. We thank all of our viewers for their support of both of our organizations. You can go online at emetonline.org and spme.org to make a contribution, which will help both of these organizations continue their important work on both Capitol Hill and on our universities. Today's webinar will be recorded and available for viewing at a later date. I urge you all to share the link far and wide, as the issues that we'll be discussing require urgent attention. If you have any questions for Dr. Romirowsky, you can place them in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and I'll try to get to as many as possible a bit later in the program. Please do limit your submissions to a brief question only. Welcome, Asaf, and thanks so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I wanted to start by asking you just your thoughts on what we've seen transpiring across the country since the barbaric massacre of 1,200 Israelis and kidnapping of over 250 Israeli citizens on October 7th of last year. In a sane world, one would imagine that citizens across the globe would have rallied around Israel and the Jewish people who were impacted by the October 7th atrocities, but we don't live in a sane world. We live in a world where anti-Semitism never fully disappears and where anti-Semites are growing in for a number of multitude of reasons. Sorry, I sounded like Joe Biden there. You and I have been dealing with campus anti-Semitism issues for quite a long time, and we even co-wrote a number of articles on the topic, including one in the Jerusalem Post in 2019 that was called "College Administrators Are Aiding and Abetting Anti-Semites," and one in Newsweek magazine in 2020 entitled "College Administrators Must Address Anti-Semitism on Their Campuses." Clearly, our calls were not heeded, but are you surprised at just how quickly and organized these protests and encampments popped up and how aggressive the protesters were? You know, what were you thinking as all of this was blowing up?
Okay, great. Well, first of all, again, thank you for hosting this, and it's a pleasure to always come together amongst friends and discuss these critical issues. So let me first start by trying to frame this. What I've seen and what I've been arguing since 10/7 and prior to that none of this has come in a vacuum. This has all been a layered and a clear architecture that has been set up. To my mind, Israel is facing a war on three fronts. One is the war on the ground, dealing with the actuality of dealing with the battles in Gaza and now in the north. The second one is going to be the battle dealing with the patrons of the war, ranging from Iran all the way to Malaysia. And the front that is critical and is important to our narrative is, of course, the war on European and U.S. campuses. This has been revealed and validated as our war against Hamas, the Muslim Brotherhood, on American college campuses. What you've seen is, and really, this is, illustrated by the comments that came out, right in the immediacy after 10/7, is the fact that you had an entire echo chamber of people that even after the reality of seeing the barbarism, the Nazi barbaric acts of Hamas that were, that modern day Holocaust, that the immediate response to this was that Israel is a colonial white settler, state. And if this is indeed colonialism, then the events of 10/7 are actually decolonialism. And so the responses that came out from administrators, professors who were going on, and we've seen some of the many quotes who were, I'm quoting here, they thought this was awesome. They were exhilarated by the attacks. The fact that they saw decolonization in actuality was how this was sold. Again, validating the narrative and the infrastructure that was created, really, I would argue, since the 1950s and the 1960s, and amplified by the structure of the Arab world buying chairs and departments to create a consistent political narrative, or what we call in the social sciences, the hijacking of agents of soft power, namely academia and journalism and other kind of outlets at large to shape and win the hearts and minds, where Israel can do no right and the Palestinians can do no wrong, which is why you see this constant denial of the reality, denying rape, denying the fact, the maiming of bodies, the burning of babies. I mean, all of this has been constantly deflected by the echo chamber that we've seen on campuses. The crescendo is probably what we saw this past spring, where you saw the encampments on campus. And again, in a kind of a perverse 1984 reality where the campuses have been spewing, again, propaganda rather than facts. And I would argue even furthermore, actual terrorism. We saw, individuals who were involved with the Muslim Brotherhood. We saw actually individuals were involved and convicted for terrorism, namely at Columbia University. We saw back in 2004, 2005, and later on, there was a very famous professor, Sami El-Arian, who at South Florida University was raising money for the PFLP and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. His wife was actually on part of the encampments, at Columbia. His son-in-law is a professor of Middle East studies. I mean, you see these ongoing connections, in addition to outside agitators like the people who were involved in Occupy Wall Street and people like Code Pink and people, and a lot of money that was thrown into all of this to create a consistent mechanism of deflection. And of course, this is all part of what I would consider to be the largely normalizing of anti-Semitism politically, culturally, and academically within American society today, which to my mind is also what you're seeing today play out on the campaign trail as we look forward towards November and the entire theater that is being used by the campuses inside and out. And as always, whatever happens on campus never ends on campus.
Yeah. So let's expand this a little bit. What are your thoughts on why universities tend to be hotbeds of anti-Semitism while also at the same time providing safe spaces for everyone of every demographic except for Jews? There's a frightening parallel in my mind to Germany pre-World War II, where Nazism basically started on campuses with the brown shirts and then infiltrated all of society, as you just pointed out. In this context, can you talk about the influence of the movement of the 1960s radicals into the academy, the influx of foreign faculty members and students who bring with them anti-Semitic and certainly anti-Israel biases, and then the role that intersectionality and the Red-Green Alliance has had on where we are today in this very dire situation?
Sure. So what you're seeing develop, and that's a very critical question to understand the historical evolution of all of this. You've seen since the 1960s a kind of a development of what I would define as scholar activists, individuals who've given up their scholarship in the face of activism, what I would consider to be propaganda. So you're no longer being judged based on actually producing scholarship, which is what universities should be doing, inquisitive research and whatnot. They're actually being judged on their activism. How many people are in the quad calling for death to Jews, the fact that they're leading the marches, the fact that they're leading the entire movement on social media. Parenthetically and also in parallel, it's important to understand that many of these professors have actually called on their students since 10/7 to go to pro-Palestinian rallies as part of receiving credit for their class. The encampments, also important and critical to contextualize this as it relates to your question as well, and I will go into the historical part. We already had information that at the beginning of the last spring semester, students at Columbia and elsewhere were going to be receiving pass-fail grades. Ergo, there was going to be no consequences to their actions when they are destroying property, taking hostages, hijacking institutions, and manifesting an entire 1968 environment on their campuses. So they were already protected in that larger environment. But what you did see here is that, in particular in the humanities, you had this development of of areas where people have studied, really looking into adopting more of a Marxist leftist ideology. The academy in general has been much more open to those kind of viewpoints. Latest stats, and again, we did this, years ago, after 9/11, post 9/11, and the ratio between conservatives and liberals on campuses, liberals are always outmatched conservative view on campuses. So the question of discourse on campus and honest discourse and exchange of ideas is really a larger question of the balance in the academy. I would argue, and specifically within the humanities, and in particular within the area of, let's say, Middle East studies, Israel studies, and whatnot, up until the year, let's say, the late 90s, you could have syllabi who were you would have balanced syllabi where professors would present both sides of complex issues. Today, that's not the case. Today, they're being spoon-fed, and you're seeing that based on the reactions of the campuses and the administrators and some of the presidents that have come out, namely people at Chicago or Ben Sass in Florida, who've made comments that our job is not to spoon-feed you. We're here to teach you and to learn. And so if you think we're here to cajole you, to coddle you, and to give you, and spoon-feed you all the information, look elsewhere. And so there's a whole question about the functionality of what the university is doing. All of this has been amplified by the trigger words that we all know related to the philosophy of intersectionality. Within that pyramid of intersectionality, where the gold standard of oppression rests within the Palestinian narrative. So if you support anybody who is oppressed, immediately you have to support the Palestinian cause. So you have all these disciplines and departments ranging from women's studies to LGBTQ studies to Black studies to whatnot, who've immediately somehow adopted, again, not based on fact, just based on the mere feeling, or what I would consider to be identity politics, that they need to support the underdog cause. And there is no underdog cause greater than the Palestinian cause, which is why they've created this kind of centrality or gold standard within the narrative. It's also important to contextualize that when you've seen other elements or other events happening in the region, namely, for example, the Abraham Accords, where you saw actual normalized relations of Israel between Israel and the Arab world, they made little to no difference on the campus narrative, because the only lens in which everybody talks about Middle East issues or American foreign policy in the Middle East is somehow centered only with the so-called centrality of the Palestinian narrative. And somehow, so as a result of that, even though that was a monumental event as far as normalizing ties and how wonderful it is, it made no impact on the discourse. And I would actually say they actually pushed back and tried to bring it back to the Palestinian cause, trying to argue they are the central issue, which again talks about the larger issue of 10/7. This was also, of course, part of the backbone of the boycott, divestment, and sanction movement, and BDS at large, which again centers the entire conflict on a very binary element of a black and white issue, which again is antithetical, ahistorical, afactual to the reality on the ground, but presents the conflict as a very binary issue, and present it all with the layer of social justice, rights, all these trigger words that play into the narrative. And Jews, and the pro-Israel community, again, related to the intersectionality argument, are perceived to be not as minorities, are seen as white upper middle class, so they don't fall within that categorization. As always, that has become the ultimate challenge, that the Jewish community needs to prove and to validate that they are, one, minorities, and B, that anti-Semitism is racism, not necessarily in that order of importance, but those has been always our challenges, even though the reality is far different if we look at the makeup of the state of Israel. But that has been part of the ingredient. The other part, which is also critical to understand, is of course that when apartheid South Africa ended and Nelson Mandela, everything, ended, they needed to find a new cause. The new apartheid cause célèbre was transformed as an international global cause to the campuses as to the Israeli-Palestinian dynamic. So Israel is an apartheid state, was moved over. Jews are white, Palestinians are black. There was an attempt to basically parachute the debate about race relations in the United States to the Middle East reality because it was digestible, it was binary, and something that they could adopt. And in addition to all of that, you also seen a whole layer of Marxist, Leninist kind of narrative that has been used to the campuses, which has been illustrated by many of the students that you're seeing on campus protesting and jumping up at these rights. Of course, the greatest ironies is that many of these progressive or so-called progressive groups have basically tried to say that their progressivism is somehow articulated or found in Gaza when you had queers and gays for Palestine or for Gaza, knowing that if you were openly gay, you would be literally hung in Gaza. The Pride Parade is happening in Tel Aviv, not in downtown Sajaiya or Jabalia or anywhere else in Gaza City. And so the entire disconnect between the reality is a microcosm of the disconnect between what is perceived to be reality on American college campuses and the regional reality on the ground. And so they dismiss that in every way, shape, or form. And so our challenge, again, is to hold our institutions accountable and to actually look at facts and to teach fact and to maintain scholarship, which, as you know, we've been trying to work with many of our members, because while it's on the one hand very easy to quantify the fanfare outside on the campus quad, what's harder to determine is really the indoctrination that is happening in college classrooms where professors and TAs are basically using and abusing the podium to teach and indoctrinate students based on this fallacious narrative.
Well, so one of the tools that's being used for indoctrination purposes is diversity, equity, inclusion, or as everyone is probably familiar with, the DEI initiatives that have come to sort of take over campus culture, and they play an important role in the acceptance of anti-Semitic speech and actions on campuses. So since all of this is blown up on our campuses, DEI programs, I think I'm hoping that they are being looked at a little bit more critically. What they've done is colleges have invested tens of millions of dollars into these programs and hiring deans and forcing students and faculty into these indoctrination classes. So you point out Jews are the oppressors, colonizers, and Palestinians and other Muslims are victims of the Zionists. Do you see this evolving or changing? Do you think that DEI programs are going to at least be expanded to recognize Jews as a protected class, if not actually dissipated? Or am I naive to have hope that there'll be change there?
Well, we need to have hope. I mean, it's important. We believe in the institutions, and I think that we support. We need to save them, or at least try to make them better and hold them accountable to what they're supposed to be doing. I think that the religion on campus is what I consider to be the anti-fact religion, and DEI has amplified that. The greater challenge with the DEI narrative has been that the portfolio of anti-Semitism has fell on the responsibility of the DEI officers. And you're correct to point out that the institutions have invested huge sums of money into the industry of DEI. That being said, you are seeing that of late, places like in Texas and Florida have fired DEI officers because of what they are putting out there, the toxicity. Of late, we've also found text messages and information from Columbia administrators and others where you actually saw that, what we knew to be true already, but validating in the sense that the administrators are parachuting their own politics One of the greater incidents that I'm sure that you and I have discussed in the past was the famous case at Stanford, where the chief DEI officer questioned a judge who came to the law school at Stanford Law and basically called on everybody, even though she was organizing, because this was a conservative judge, to basically protest him. And he called them on their ignorance and on their stupidity. Eventually, she was dismissed. But you see the weaponization of the DEI narrative on campus. They are only, again, the equity and inclusion is only for some, not for all. And so you have this kind of double standard of where when you look at the configuration of minorities on campus, Asian Americans, Hindus, Sikhs, Jews, the debate about who is a minority, shows a lot of centrality as it relates to African Americans and Palestinians. And, this is where the Muslim centrality has played into all of this, not to mention the fact that anytime the Jewish community mentions anti-Semitism, the immediate second word has to be Islamophobia. And you've seen it also play out politically as a way to kind of equalize or the parallels while the events, you're seeing these days validated by post 10/7 reality that people are calling for death to Jews, not death to the right, not death to the left, but actually death to Jews, related to your question about, the Nazi narrative. So I am hopeful that in some places, especially as a result of the hearings happening on Capitol Hill, and that the fact that these committees are demanding information under discovery and demanding text messages and information, that many of these bad actors are being revealed and discovered for the nefarious activity they actually are doing. And there is going to be a measure of self-correctness if the institutions want to maintain and regain their profile as research institutions, as maintaining their rankings and what they're actually producing. That's really a silver lining that needs to be looked at as far as the actual product that universities are supposed to be producing at large.
So why do you think, Asaf, that it's been so difficult for campus administrators, from presidents and deans of student life, et cetera, to address the rising anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism on their campuses? You and I have been dealing with this for a very long time, from Israel apartheid walls, marches, sit-ins, disruptions, and cancellations of events that feature a Jew or an Israeli. The haters have seemingly been running free on campuses, and this predates October 7th. It's been going on for a long time. So I know that administrators, they're worried about free speech and academic freedom rights, but, it seems that to Jewish students, civil rights and needs for protections from assaults on them, the Hillels, religious practices in general are taking second fiddle or backseat to concerns about free speech. But there's also codes of conduct, and everything we saw transpire over the past academic year were clear violations of these codes. So why do you think the presidents and other administrators, even boards of trustees that have allowed the inmates to run the asylum while they hide in fear? Do you think that Claudine Gay and Liz McGill, their Capitol Hill testimony fiasco and their loss of their jobs will have meaningful implications and changes on policies and wake up administrators that there are things that they can do, they can utilize their codes of conduct?
Well, I think it cuts both ways. It's a double-edged sword. On the one hand, you saw that the hearings on Capitol Hill showcased the rot on Capitol Hill, on the campuses, and the ignorance, the fact that that Gay and McGill didn't know what anti-Semitism was, and they were coached clearly by the same law firms as to say what they said. That being said, both McGill and Gay are still tenured at their institutions. They're still collecting a significant salary, and they're going back into the echo chamber of which they came out of. And so the universities at large, or this kind of larger industrial academic complex that has been, that we're looking at, not all of them have backbones, and they're afraid of backlash, of not being seen as inclusive, as to have the DEI. And so their consequences have come very close. They have not really wanted to rock the boat. as to not offend anybody on campus. Positively, you are seeing more and more Jewish donors speaking out and taking their money elsewhere. And I think that obviously is a concern for the universities who are concerned about their purses. And you are seeing now, for example, at Harvard, there is already a significant they've lost money in their endowment, and Jewish students are going down as far as applications for Harvard. That being said, universities operate like large hedge funds, and so Harvard has an endowment of a small European country. Though during COVID, for example, they for some reason couldn't have enough money to pay their cafeteria workers, and that's again kind of nor here nor there, but it's to kind of illustrate how they've used and abused their monies. And so I say this tongue in cheek, but it is true. While we have bought the buildings, the Jewish community, the pro-Israel community, the opposition has bought the education. From a cost-benefit analysis, they've done a much better job, and they have played the long game. This is really part of our largest deficit here and why we are behind the eight ball. Catholics and Jews are the two largest populations in American society, have invested the most amount of capital and time in our institutions. And they are the same populations that are now being turned on by these very institutions that they invested in. And, ironically, but also a reality check that is worth noting, right after 10/7, it was Catholic universities who had conservative values who said to Jews, come to us because we are safer on campus. And it actually is true. And so again, I think that the patterns of behavior are playing out. How the universities are reacting and responding to the scrutiny. I mean, again, you're seeing now Harvard refusing to give documentation to the Virginia Fox Committee, and they are trying to basically shove everything under the carpet. You're seeing similar actions happen around the country as well. And so they are really on the defensive here to try to say we can solve it ourselves. The public scrutiny is critically important, and a silver lining is important because they're holding them accountable for for monies that are coming in, violation of tax laws, and they need to be held accountable. And I would also say that legally speaking, they also be held accountable to the definitions, apropos your point before, about questions of hate speech and free speech that is maintaining in states that have anti-BDS legislation. Universities, as you and I know so well, have refused to adopt the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. And so again, without having a clear standard of what the problem is, they try to get away with it as saying, well, that's only critical speech, it's part of my free speech. I'm not a racist, I'm just a Zionist, I'm an anti-Zionist, I'm a critical individual of the state of Israel. If anybody has any doubt as to whether or not anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, 10/7 comes along to validate the fact that they are indeed synonymous. But as we can see, the patterns of behavior of these institutions that have been operating for decades based on these orthodoxies, they have trying to push back, and that's where we need to move forward to kind of push them in the direction of maintaining and demand the balance that our students and the kids and grandkids deserve to have when they go to campuses. Still, for most Americans, their first line of giving is their alma maters. And we like to believe that the institutions we're sending our kids and grandkids to is the same ones we graduated from. That's not necessarily the case. And so we have to kind of see where we can make dent, what can be improved, and the patterns that are going to change going forward as where to send our kids and grandkids to. So if the metric, which again relates to American society as far as the college, getting an education, getting a job, and how this plays out is also important. It's also important to understand, on this note, I don't want to forget this as I'm talking, there's also been some kind of silver lining in corporate America related back to some of these cases that we've seen where law firms and hospitals are basically saying, are rescinding offers. We're not going to hire you because the quality of the people that you are producing is no longer the quality of the kind of people we can have. And if they're anti-Semitic, if they're racist, which is one and the same, we're not going to hire them. That's not the kind of people we want working in the field. That is indeed a silver lining when corporate America is speaking out, and we could use that to our advantage.
Yeah, Sullivan and Cromwell, it was reported they actually just hired I think an outside company to screen all applicants that want to work at Sullivan and Cromwell. So, and I think other law firms are following suit. So that was good news, and thank you for raising that. I do want to stay on this I want to drill down on this just a couple more minutes, Asaf, because when I look at the way the college presidents were handling their horrific encampments and intimidation and whatnot that was going on in the spring, it reminded me sort of the way the Biden administration has been appeasing Iran. I mean, these college presidents have been appeasing the fascists on their campus, and so that can only make them double down. And we saw that at graduation ceremonies that were interrupted and whatnot. I personally don't understand why these students have not been expelled. I remember reading, one college president that claimed that she couldn't expel foreign perpetrators because then they would lose their student visas. And so I'm not sure why she is concerned about that, but that was her concern. So what are your thoughts on actually negotiating with these terrorist supporters? They're conducting terrorism on their own campuses, and yet administrators are negotiating with them instead of punishing them. So maybe you could talk about some of the compromises that some of these schools have made that have been outrageous. Northwestern's agreement was crazy. They promised to provide 2 visiting Palestinian faculty members each year, provide scholarships to Palestinian students for their 4 years. It was insane. So maybe touch on some of these compromises and your thoughts on the rewards that these student terrorists are getting.
So agreed. I mean, first of all, let me, be clear. The demands that they're demanding where the university presidents are capitulating to are BDS demands. I mean, so again, shows the success of the BDS movement and plays into all of this. And they're all the same actors, the same kind of foundations that are funding them. My small mantra these days, and something we need to be that is worth adopting, is deport and defund. I think that when you're looking at foreign students, foreign faculty who are coming with ideologies that are terrorist, and if you, to date, it is not asked on an application, were you ever a member of a foreign terrorist organization, of an FTO? That should be part of the screening process, as well as looking at foreign funding and, violations of tax laws, whether or not they're violating FARA issues as far as foreign agent, as far as monies that are coming in, Qatari money, other Arab money that is coming in. They are investing, and there are strings attached to the monies that they've been investing in the institutions, knowing that if you buy a chair or department or professorship, you are buying the politics in which these topics are being taught. And so we need to crack down on that. And so foreign money is one way we could do it. Violation of tax laws is another way to do it. And I think we need to be doing a much better job at screening our faculty, visiting faculty, and students that are coming in. And as a way to, the irony is, to your point, is that the American Western liberal institution is being hijacked by totalitarian regimes that could be argued that what makes us different than Tehran. If we're going into a way where this is kind of this orthodoxy of, we need to break that. We need to hold them accountable for what they are supposed to be, maintaining those exchange and discourse of values and, exchange and discourse of ideas. We're not here to spoon feed, you. And the other part, which is again part of the symptom of this, is the cancel culture environment. The fact that these groups believe that they can intimidate the institution, and if they don't like a viewpoint, they're going to shut it down. Again, an anathema to the entire architecture. They are allowed to have their own viewpoints under, free speech, and whatnot. But it's the question, as you know as well as I do, about the dissemination and when they indoctrinate, which is where they're violating their roles as professors and as institutions. And so that's what we need to be holding them accountable to. And I think that it is outrageous to me that university presidents are capitulating to terrorism. I mean, that's the bottom line. It is terrorism that is hijacking our institutions in the name of free speech. They are hijacking, they're trying to turn America on its head. And that's where this nefarious activity should not be allowed. And they should lose their jobs, not be kind of hired again in the in the back end, as another professorship, or go back to where they came from. We need to root out the bad apples. And whether or not these individuals, faculty, and particular administrators need to be put on mothballs or basically need to go on some kind of reserve ship in order as a way to basically push them out, there needs to be a way to stop the bleeding. It's going to take a long time, and we're already seeing the symptoms of already a long game that they've been playing. Now that we've seen one of the most horrific and barbaric acts happening, a modern day Holocaust illustrated by the Gaza war. You're seeing it in our lifetime, and you're seeing them defending terrorism. That is a clear red line. And so again, we need to, if universities are to maintain their social indicators for American society and what America represents to the world, and standing up for these very issues, combating terrorism and anti-Semitism should be a clear #1 priority. And that's where we need to be pushing the envelope as hard and as far as possible.
So you brought up the IRA definition of anti-Semitism a couple minutes ago. There's a lot that and I want to say that that there's a piece of legislation called the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act that Emmett has been working on for a number of years, and it was actually passed in the House not too long ago, several months ago. Chuck Schumer has been sitting on it in the Senate, and it's a real shame, because that codifies the IRA definition of anti-Semitism and would be a tool for college administrators to use to identify anti-Semitism and enforce civil rights of Jewish students on their college campuses. Under the Trump administration, the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights, which was being run by our friend Ken Marcus for a period of time, actually was enforcing Trump's executive order that did codify the IRA definition. It's my understanding that the Biden DOA is not really using that much. Over the past spring, there have been a multitude of complaints that have been filed with the Office of Civil Rights, but there have also been Islamophobia, as you point out, complaints that have been issued. What do you see happening at the Department of Education? And, obviously the upcoming election is going to play a role in how active the DOE becomes in protecting Jewish students. But what do you see happening right now?
Look, they've been trying to sit on a lot of these issues, as our friend, Ken Marcus has pointed out for a very long time. Bureaucracies take time and they move slowly. I think that the Fox committee has been very proactive in doing a lot of work, but they need evidence and they need data. And part of helping our students create that evidence is also learn what Title VI filings require, how to do them properly, to create the proper evidence that the Department of Education can investigate these institutions. There is also, of course, a challenge in the sense that some students don't want to file while they're still on campus for fear of retribution. And so it takes time, as far as getting the evidence going forward. My hope is that as a result of how bad it is on campus, people will do more of that, and that we hold them accountable. I mean, this is a phenomenal tool that we have, that many of us have worked on for years regarding Title VI, and that helps students. Let me be clear here. It helps students, it doesn't help faculty. On the faculty side of things, faculty these days, and this is something, many of us have been working on, including, SPME and Emmett, is also helping create, giving pro bono legal advice to faculty when they're dealing with their unions, with their own disciplines, where they're only administrators, as a result of the legal challenges and how this is being played out when it comes to pushing along within their respective disciplines BDS, and they're being pushed out, trying to root Jews out of the campuses, something we saw happen, for example, within the CUNY system, which again has been, a horrific system at large as far as pushing out Jews and pro-Israel individuals. So we have a great deal of challenge. The Department of Education to date is very helpful, but as you mentioned correctly, they've been trying to shelve a lot of these issues, and we need to, again, lobby, push these issues again forward, push the Anti-Semitism Act forward. I mean, as I said before, the universities we need to hold them accountable. There needs to be an adaptation of the IRA definition, which is the most widely accepted one. And by the way, the same one that the State Department operates on. And the fact that the universities are operating as islands because they don't feel comfortable with the anti-Israel, anti-Zionist element within the IRA definition is only a way for them to try to deflect and try to push aside what reality actually is. And if you test out most of these issues today, you will see that the anti-Israelism that they are putting out there is 100% anti-Semitic. Natan Sharansky would argue today that, and he said it on record, that if he had to rewrite his 3Ds today as indicators of what anti-Semitism and anti-Israelism is, it would be further and much worse given the current reality. So again, as another anecdotal kind of aspect of all of this debate.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Before I turn to the audience questions, and there are quite a lot of them, I wanted to just ask you your prediction for the upcoming academic year. I mean, why would we think that the protests won't continue when the most any student has received is a slap on the wrist? They get photographed and fingerprinted and they're back out. And then like Harvard did, they just say, okay, we're going to drop all charges against all these students who were recently arrested. And actually, I recommend to everybody, Jason Riley's Wall Street Journal column today is terrific on this exact topic, very timely given our webinar today. But Jason Riley actually quotes the editors of the Harvard Crimson who chastised the decision by Harvard to drop charges. And the Crimson stated, Harvard may have further emboldened pro-Palestine student groups ahead of the return to campus in September. So what are your predictions on the upcoming semester, Asaf?
I'm not optimistic. I mean, I don't disagree with the op-ed that you're referring to. I think that they're not sitting on their laurels, the opposition. They are planning, and what I have seen and and as an historian, I never predict the future, but I would say these patterns tend to repeat themselves. The encampments, to my mind, are a preamble of what we're going to see in Chicago during the DNC. I think that between now and November, we're going to see more of this. And I think that Jewish students, pro-Israel, the pro-Israel community needs to be prepared and not to go in with their blinders on. While the spring semester ended, there's already a significant amount of planning for the fall semester. I mean, let's put it into context. I mean, the fact that students at Berkeley and at Columbia and other places had playbooks on October 9th and October 10th on how to activate the campus post October 7th, none of this came in a vacuum. They're operating, they're planning, and many of these groups on campus, groups like the Student for Justice in Palestine and other Palestinian groups, are planning activism as they move forward. And now you also have faculty for Palestine on many of these campuses. And to the point that, the Wall Street Journal piece is making, yes, I believe we're going to see more of that. And because we know it's coming, I think that we should not be surprised, and we should definitely make sure that we are prepared for a very turbulent fall and upcoming year for sure. Not to mention the fact that you can't, of course, put aside the fact that as the war in Israel continues, current events will trickle down into campus, and the continuance of deflection and denial as relates to the reality on the ground will indeed continue in volume. And I think we need to be prepared for that in a very strong way. And to my mind, all of us, need to support everybody we can. We're doing the hand-to-hand combat on the campuses because they're going to need a lot of support. And that's something that we need to be fighting for, because what we are fighting for is for American Western values, American, society, and we're fighting terrorism. And that, let's not be, we should not mince words on this. This is actual terrorism. This is the Muslim Brotherhood in America. And terrorism should not be tolerated. And that's something we should be prepared for in a very, very in a very forceful and in a way to combat this.
Okay, so thanks, Asaf. I'm going to turn to, there's a lot of questions that I want to try to get to as many as possible. Someone asked, has any effort been made to organize prominent faculty that are opposed to what is going on campus? He used an example of people like Larry Summers, Steven Pinker. If faculty were to organize, threaten to walk, what's going on at the faculty level?
I think that people are, not enough volume. I think that Summers and Pinker have spoken out. People are calling the institutions on their name. You've also seen some faculty leave their institutions and go to, for example, to YU or other places, and making a point of leaving with a bang. I think that it's important to fight the fight. I think that, people with stature on these campuses should be speaking out, and we're here to help amplify their messages. Many of our members, have different, rankings on faculty and whatnot. My concern, by the way, is not only for the senior ranking, faculty, but also especially for junior faculty and for faculty who are not tenured. There are a bunch of lawsuits going on now. This is, as a point of reference, I'm here in Philadelphia. One of our colleagues, we know at Haverford College, a Quaker college, an Israeli professor is being sued after it was tenured on campus and being accused of, crimes against Palestinians and whatnot. His politics are, left of center, yet because he's an Israeli, he's being attacked. And the university is leaving him hanging. There is a variety of lawsuits going on now. And I think that not only that is it important for faculty who have name recognition to speak out, because that helps as far as the larger movement in the community and in the general community, but also the hand-to-hand combat, again, helping faculty deal with their own administrations. Part of the raison d'etre of SPME's creation at large, and ASMEA, by the way, was to create a community of scholars, because people feel so isolated and marginalized, and even more so these days. And part of what we're trying to do is help them know that they're not alone. So the more, it's not, this is not, the question to your point is not an easy question, because the courage it takes today to speak out, to sign out, could have significant consequences on faculty and on their standing within their own institutions. It's not a guarantee, because we've seen violence, verbal and physical, violence against faculty and students. So it's not that simple, and it takes a lot of courage. And that's where, I want to stress that it's not that simple, even for senior faculty, to speak out because of fear of retribution.
Thanks, Asaf. Someone asked if you can talk about how SJP and CARE are involved in campuses. We could spend an hour talking about SJP, but maybe you can just touch on it for a minute or two, Asaf.
Sure. Many of these Muslim charities are operating on the campuses that, like I said, they have ties to terrorist organizations, particularly the Muslim Brotherhood. SJP is an outgrowth of a group that was known as GUPS, the General Union for Palestine Students, has its roots back in the PLO, and so the activation of campuses and the use of these institutions to promote their own agenda. CARE has the Council of American Islamic Relations, has individuals who've had active ties to terrorism. They work together with other groups like Code Pink and Black Lives Matter and other organizations, the fellow travelers that work with all of this. So without going into a lot, and there's a lot to talk about within these, brotherhood ties at large and terrorism ties at large. But it is important to understand that you are seeing a coordinated effort of these groups who are working together to help finance, train, and to activate their tentacles on the campuses with the idea of putting out their agenda. That goes back to my earlier point as far as deport and defund. If we have evidence, and there's ample evidence to the use of terrorism on campus, that needs to stop. That's a clear red line. It's not free speech, it's terrorism. And so if terrorism is being funded on the campus, if it's Hamas, it's not free speech. And similar with CARE. And so those are the kind of evidence that we need to prove to the Department of Education, to the administrations themselves, to the communities within where they are located, talking to law enforcement and other places as far as the use of terrorism on campus, and that should be stopped. We have enough evidence of that took place on the encampments in the spring. And by the way, parenthetically, as I'm sure you and obviously many of our listeners know, the current Attorney General in Virginia has opened up a case, the connections between a group known as the American Muslims for Palestine and SJP and their terrorism ties. And yesterday there was a ruling that we now can, that proven that they have to produce evidence that we're hoping that will show the financial connections to many of these organizations. And so those are important things that need to be enforced. And my hope is that other attorney generals around the country, given that we know today what groups like SJP are doing, will open up further cases on these very, very issues, because they're the ones who are pushing the agenda and they're the ones who are promoting BDS on these campuses.
Someone asked where you would suggest that Jewish parents consider sending their children. Are there good institutions out there that have not allowed SJP on their campuses or have finally thrown them out?
So going back to my earlier point, I mean, I think that the Attorney General's investigation is opening, some investigations on the campuses. Some of the SJP groups have been expelled, but then they are allowed to come back after they've gone through some kind of training, and then they're allowed to be certified again as a legitimate campus group. I mean, the certification is critical. I think that patterns as it relates to where Jewish students should go on campus is changing. And for all intents and purposes, I say this tongue in cheek, but, I think it's true in the reality that some of the ivies have become poison ivy. I think that looking at Southern schools, Florida schools have been very strong. I mean, again, you can see the politics that are involved, but Governor DeSantis has taken down a significant crackdown when it comes to Middle East studies, the adaptation of IRA anti-BDS legislation, and pushing out groups that are ties to terrorism. Places in Texas have done the same. Southern schools that have had more conservative values have also been much more open and a much more malleable situation. Let me be clear, but of course, there is no institution today in America that is immune to this. There are levels, there are grades, and I think that what we need to make sure is that our students, before they get to campus, and again, the same biases that we're talking about now, which is the low-hanging fruit, is also found in the K through 12. We need to make sure that our students and parents are prepared to know what they are looking at. You shouldn't go to a campus in the same way you shouldn't be buying a car or a house without an inspection. We can look at trends, we can look at patterns, we can look at resources in the community. There are a lot more than there were years ago. And I think you have to consider all of the factors that you're looking for. While on the one hand, looking to find a good place for your kid to go to school, but on the other hand, looking at the environment that your kid is going into. The number one job of the institution, of the university, as parents, as grandparents, they have to maintain the safety of their kid. If they cannot do the basic maintenance of safety on campuses. And what we saw in the spring, where kids are being attacked verbally and physically, then that is quite a telltale about the university's ability to maintain their safety, and they're going to lose constituents. And so those are the kind of things another element where we need to hold them accountable for maintaining basic safety of students on campus.
So a number of people are asking more about the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act and why it's not, Chuck Schumer is not putting it to a vote on the Senate floor. And I want to just respond to some of these points on the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act. I think Schumer is not sending it to a vote because he does not want to have to force Democrats to be on record voting against it. Many Democrats do not support the definition, the IRA definition, for their various reasons. And Schumer does not want to make Democrats look bad, especially in an election season where many are up, when he wants to retain control of the Senate. What we can do, people are asking to force that. I would just like to share that Emmett has been working on other legislative vehicles to try to get the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act passed in the Senate through the Appropriations Committee, the Subcommittee on Education. But what we really need is more data, more anecdotal information to help people to understand why this is such a critically important, and when I say people, I mean lawmakers, it's such a critically important piece of legislation. Please work with the Hillel houses and Chabad houses and have as many anecdotal stories from Jewish students that you can pass along to us, that we will make sure get to Congress and the various lawmakers who are working very hard on this. So everybody's help is needed. Call your lawmakers, put pressure on, because now is the time, and Emmett is really all over this right now. So thank you all for your questions on that. And Asaf, someone asked what it is that SPME is doing. If they make a donation to SPME, how are we organized as an organization to help on college campuses?
So again, we're helping our membership by providing all the tools that they need. I mean, part of the raison d'etre of SPME was to create and help faculty with faculty needs, whether or not it's scholarship as far as documentation, pro bono legal work, that we're able to provide them with strategies when it comes to BDS matters, all the things that faculty need as far as helping them in their standing with their own institutions. And they vary from campus to campus. Situations, differ, but also a sense of support. And the fact that they're, as I said before, they're not alone. We're helping them, as far as letters to their institutions, materials. We're going to their campuses. Because SPME is multidisciplinary, and some of the topics that come about are related to the Middle East, we are able to help them with Middle East subject matter experts to come to their campuses. We work within their own respective departments in order to come out to where the events come from their departments organically. We give out micro grants. I mean, so there are a lot of things that we give to our members and to figure, how to deal with their campuses. And so these are the kind of things that they require. In our other avenue, through the ASMIA Avenue, which is the Association of Middle East Studies in Africa, many things that faculty need are also presentation at academic conferences, peer-reviewed journal articles, both that we provide for them, and a sense where they can exchange ideas in a non-hostile environment. Which is something that is unfortunately happening in greater volume on many of these campuses.
So we have like a minute left, and somebody has a question regarding the outside funding of the campus protests. I had a question on that for you as well that we didn't get to. So can we use this last minute or two, Asaf, to just touch on the outside funding, Rockefeller, Ford, Soros, Westpac?
Sure. The parallel and the stream of money that is coming into the campuses are funded by many of the groups that have been funding a lot of the BDS activity. Foundations like Westpac in New York, which has been the fiscal trustee for some of these BDS groups. Groups like the Tide Foundation, the Rockefeller Brothers. There's been a great deal of Soros money that has been coming in they come with a clear agenda, and they are funding these activities. It's no surprise that the architecture of the encampment was the uniformity, the tents, the food that came in. And so what happens is, as far as the chains of money, is that unfortunately, when some monies come in through some of the Palestinian groups on campus, the universities are laundering the money for them when they are going in. So part of the deep dive has to be done while looking at the monies that are coming in, which is why, going back to my earlier point before, looking at sources of funding that are coming into the campuses with terrorist ties, BDS ties, and that's critical, because if universities are located within states that have anti-BDS legislation, and you have BDS organizations that are funding BDS activity on campus, that has legal consequences. You can craft that, you can cut down on that money. Beyond that, there are, of course, as we know, money that is coming from the Middle East into these activities, other Muslim charities that are being used on, outside of the campus. Those are part of the campus agitators. This is part of the deep dive that is being looked at very carefully. The lawsuit that I was mentioning and the investigation of the Attorney General as it relates to the ties between AMP and SJP all represent that these charities are really, one should look carefully at whether or not they're violating their non-for-profit status, what the production of what they are putting out there while they're pushing these nefarious agendas. So there's a lot of tools that we have, and that again is part of the where some of the information, the demands coming out of the Department of Education and Ways and Means Committee, as far as tax violations and as far as FARA issues, these are all the things that we have in our toolbox that can be implemented into these charities and these organizations who claim to have clean, for lack of a better word, or kind of idealistic ideals, but they actually are have nefarious and ties to terrorism that should be cracked down on.
So we have run out of time, and I appreciate everybody listening in, and I'm sorry I didn't get to so many questions. I know that there were some very important questions here, and maybe we can have Asaf back for a follow-up. There's still lots to discuss, and there will be another semester coming up very soon, I'm sure, with a lot to talk about. So thank you all for your support for both organizations. Asaf, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Really appreciate it. We will look forward to seeing you next week with another great webinar. Have a good day.
Thank you as always.